Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Monica Yellowtail, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Before we begin, for those who may not know, Redwin is a nonprofit organization that provides tribal technical assistance on a variety of programs, including, but not limited to, HHS, CY, and elder abuse. This ranges from policy review via email to site visits. If you're interested, you can contact me at my email, monica@red-wind.net. You can also visit our website at red-wind.net for additional information on services we provide, upcoming events, resources such as handouts and guidebooks that you can download. This presentation was brought to you in partnership with Redwind Consulting and TLPI. This project is supported by grant number 15JOVW 21GK02228. TRIB, awarded by the Office on Violence Against Women, U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this publication are those of authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Department of Justice. As this states, this training, part 3, is part of our Tribal Governments Project. Presenting with us today, we have Heather Torres and Chia Beetso. If you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat box at the bottom of the screen, and we will be allowing attendees to also raise their hand and ask questions. If there are any tech issues, you can send me a private message and we'll try to get it resolved. I'm going to now turn it over to the presenters.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. If you've been with us for all 3 parts of the series, thank you for hanging in there with us. If you're just joining us today, we welcome you. As Marlon mentioned, we'd love to see where you all are Zooming from today. And we'll begin with just some general introductions. And as Monica mentioned, Kelly, unfortunately, is not able to join us today. She sends her regards. But she will be available as well as the rest of us if you have continued questions on the topic. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to Chia to introduce herself first.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. My name is Chia Halpern Beetso, and I'm with the Tribal Law and Policy Institute as the Tribal Court Specialist. I'm a citizen of the Spirit Lake Dakota Nation, also descendant from Turtle Mountain Ojibwe and Cayuga from the Six Nations Grand River Reserve in Ontario, Canada. So welcome, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Chia. And my name's Heather Torres. I'm a program director at the Tribal Law and Policy Institute. We also have Marlon on with us as well as one of our program support specialists. So we thank Marlon for being here with us as well. My tribal affiliations, I'm a citizen of San Alfonso Pueblo and a descendant of the Navajo Nation and Mexican peoples. I am Zooming to you from Serrano and Cahuilla territory, more specifically Yohaviatum clan lands. Our host tribal nation here is the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. So I see we've got folks from Washington, Oklahoma, all over to joining us today. So thank you all so much for your time. TLPI, if folks aren't familiar, is a national training and technical assistance provider. We've been around for over 25 years providing TTA in a wide variety of areas around tribal governance, tribal capacity building, which includes tribal child welfare, tribal court development, tribal code development, really runs the gamut, as well as responses to victimization in Indian country. So we're so happy that you all are able to join us today for part 3 in our webinar series, partnership with Redwind. And with that, let's overview the agenda for today's presentation. So we're going to do a quick recap of parts 1 and 2, just in case this is the first time you all are joining us today. And then we'll be going through and discussing a little bit more what codes, policies, and protocols or procedures are. We'll use protocols and procedures interchangeably throughout the presentation. We really want to flesh out how each mechanism can be really useful in thinking about responses to issues that your community is developing. We'll be going over one example policy around confidentiality, as well as the example of a protocol development process. We'll also discuss a little bit about mission and vision and why those might be important to thinking about developing policies and protocols, as well as just how each part can really come together towards a system response. So we're excited to have you all here today. We've built in throughout the presentation chat questions, poll questions. This one's a little bit more active than our previous couple of parts here. So be ready to share in the chat. And as Monica mentioned, you can also raise your hand to ask a question live. And questions will be taken throughout, and we'll also try to reserve some time at the end for questions and discussion as well. Okay. All right, so our first topic, recap of part one. So part one was just a general introduction to tribal code development. What are they? What can the process look like? What are some general writing tips and considerations for drafting? We had foundational discussions about tribal codes and why they're so important and how they are an example of the ways our tribal communities can exercise their sovereignty. We also talked about various legal forums that may exist in tribal communities that enforce tribal code or tribal law. Folks mentioned tribal courts, peacemaking processes, elders, councils, and all of those mechanisms that are present that can help enforce those laws that are being created. We also provided some tips for teamwork, but also really emphasized that a really passionate and motivated community member can get a lot done. And that there's a lot of resources out there that can support the tribal code development process. So if folks are getting assigned, to work on or look at tribal code and don't know where to start, there are a lot of resources out there, both from TLPI, but also from other technical assistance providers like Redwind. And then we offered some consideration questions for drafting, just kind of the who, what, why, and how do codes get passed in your community? What are the processes you have to go through? Why is this issue present, or what issue are you trying to solve by drafting code? Like issues that you're seeing in the community that you're trying to address, and who. So who are you trying to protect? Who are you looking to aim for when you're drafting the code, as well as who would you want on a drafting team with you? Who could you recruit? What voices could be at the table? Chia, anything to add on the recap for part one?
No, it's great. Thanks, Heather.
Okay, great. And Marlon also dropped the recording that's available for part one, which is on Redwind's YouTube channel. And they're also working on the part two recording as well. So that will be available for folks who want to go back and have a listen. And with that, let's jump into our recap of part two. So part two advanced our foundational discussion that we had in part one, and particularly focused on the incorporation of tribal culture, tribal traditions, tribal customs and values into tribal codes, and how that can be, again, really exemplify the practice of tribal sovereignty and creating laws that reflect community values. Really, we're at a place where we don't need to copy what the states are doing, we don't need to copy what the feds are doing. There are considerations and legal mandates and repercussions that attorneys can help you navigate, but there are opportunities to really weave in tribal culture and tribal custom. We talked about how looking at that question of how can tribal traditions and values be incorporated into code. One helpful process might be setting out the topic first and say, hey, we want to look at family law cases, and then dive in and think, okay, what are some tribal values or philosophies around tribal families? Is there a value that children are sacred? Is there a value that grandmas, aunties, extended family members have responsibilities to raising children, etc.? We also talked about how incorporating tribal custom and tradition can really help tailor the code so it really reflects community norms, and that brings some more investment from your community, and really seeing those values reflected in tribal law can be really reinforcing for community members, as well as just talking about how to gather that information as well. And we had a really fruitful discussion on what is a tribal value or a tribal custom, and how would you go about seeking out information to make that determination? And we also took it a step further as, okay, hey, once you've identified that this is a tribal value or a tribal custom that we want to incorporate into our code, how do we want that custom or that value to be operationalized? Do we want it to be law itself? Do we want it to be guidance for attorneys, for judges to be able to guide the interpretation of a code? So we really encourage you taking a chance to go back and listen in. We really had some fruitful discussion. We also talked about, and we can advance to the next slide, just how laws are another vessel for enforcement, for maintaining community safety, just as our pottery, our tribal baskets, our regalia, it all has purpose, right? Oh, actually, could we go to the image there? Looks like we're on the next slide. But kind of thinking about it in that way, you know, we've got design elements, for example, on pottery or on basketry, and those design elements really help tell a story in that piece. And we can kind of think about code provisions functioning similarly, where they give guidance to interpretation or define a particular word. So we just wanted to offer that image for reflection. And specifically, we talked about 3 places in your tribal code that you might be able, or 3 mechanisms kind of to how to incorporate tribal custom and tradition, which are findings and purpose statements. We talked about definitions and how you might define a particular word in a tribal code, as well as the approach by offering a specific statute that is addressing the use of custom and tradition. So again, we hope that you can get a chance, if you didn't get to join us live, to review part 2 as well. Chia, anything to add on part 2?
Nope, I think you got it.
Great, thanks. All right, so next question, or next slide, is going to include a poll question. We just wanted to see who's in the virtual Zoom room with us in terms of their fields of practice and the knowledge that you all are going to contribute to our discussion today. So if you can, you should be seeing the poll pop up now, so that you can contribute your answer. And then if you're having trouble with the poll, you can also share that in the chat as well. And particularly if you have any experience in drafting tribal codes or tribal policies and procedures, we'd love to hear that from you as well. So we'll take a few seconds here to see if we can get folks filling out the full question. Oh, looks like, at least from what I'm seeing, there's single choice, but then there's no answers for you to select. So if folks don't mind, maybe dropping your role or the fields that you're coming from into the chat, I think that'd be great. We had some examples here. Maybe you're a victim services provider joining us, tribal court personnel, law enforcement. Maybe you work for a child advocacy center, social worker, or maybe you're just a general community member that's interested in learning more about tribal code development and policies and procedures. Oh, it's in the drop-down menu. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, great. Tribal court personnel, legal administrative manager, attorneys, lay advocates. Wonderful. VAWA coordinator. Awesome. I'm loving that we have so many different perspectives on this call, and I hope that you all can contribute when we've got discussion questions, because I think when depending on your positionality and your previous, personal and professional experiences, there's a lot of different ideas and creativity that can come from those discussions. So thank you all so much for joining today and for sharing with us. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, which should be a chat question, actually 2. So feel free to answer either or both in the chat. And what we've got here is just, what is your current understanding of why policies and protocols might be necessary? The second question is, what do you think the difference is between policies and protocols or procedures? So these are just a couple chat questions to get us going. So again, what is your current understanding of why policies and protocols might be necessary? And what do you think the difference is between policies and protocols or procedures? You can feel free to add your answers in the chat or raise your hand to be unmuted. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to start out with these questions, because I think it's one, I think it's often conflated, the nature between policies and protocols. But also it's kind of, I feel like it's just viewed as the standard thing that every, workplace or every agency has. And it's, the same thing you come across no matter where you are. It's just kind of paperwork that needs to be signed. You don't really look at it again. But as we're going to talk about today, they can be and are much, much more than that. Love it. So a policy mandates, and the procedures are the piece that makes the policy work. Love it. Okay, great. Well, if folks, if folks want to add a little bit more, feel free to come back to us in the chat at any time. Again, we're taking questions and responses throughout, and then we'll also reserve some time at the end. So thank you all so much for your contributions. And let's hop right into it because that is spot on. So up here on this slide, we just have a chart that was created by, oh, one sec. Okay, there we go. That was created by one of our colleagues at the Tribal Judicial Institute, Michelle Rivard Parks. And it's a chart that kind of just gives a general breakdown on what each piece is here that we're talking about and how they're a little bit different. So you see codes on the far left, policies in the middle, and protocols on the right. So codes, as we talked about in part one, those are your formal, legally enforceable rules, right? They're enforceable by your government or some sort of legal forum. They're usually rules that are regulating conduct or say what behaviors are permitted or prohibited. And then you have in the center there policies. So those are also formal, but those are statements about the purpose, the standards and processes that you're going to put in place that are often informed by a code, right? Policies are they are enforceable, but usually by the agency that's creating those policies, right? So think, your workplace, you hold a board position, those policies are usually reinforced by the agency that's creating them, right? And then protocols. So protocols are also, again, formal, but they're kind of steps to help effectuate or basically bring the policy into action, right? So there, you've got the mandates from the code, you've got your policy that's reflecting the mandate, and then you've got your protocols that are your action steps to actually implementing the step, right? The protocols in particular are helpful when you have a lot of entities working together. So it really provides guidance to practitioners and helps create consistency where everybody knows what steps need to be taken at a particular point. They are generally not legally enforceable, but they may have legal implications if folks are agreeing to effectuate a particular procedure or protocol. Okay. Any questions on this slide? Nope, I think we're good. Okay, so now we're going to kind of go through and break down each one here and have a little bit of discussion. So codes, again, right? Tribes as sovereign governments, they have the right, the power, the authority to establish laws, pass ordinances, to regulate the behavior and the conduct that they view as permissible under its jurisdiction. Again, formal, legally enforceable, they regulate conduct, and they're really truly an example of the exercise of tribal sovereignty, right? Codes are law. So it's that code development process is super important because these codes are putting out or can be seen as a reflection of tribal priorities. And again, as we discussed in part 2, tribal values and customs. So that's tribal codes. And then we'll talk through the next piece, policies. And we're going to dive in a little bit more here. And then we'll also have Chia talk about protocols and procedures. Okay, so policies. These were our formal statements of the applicable purpose, the processes, the standards. These, again, usually enforceable by the agency that's creating them, right? So these policies, you can think of them as a little bit more internal. So they're looking into internally about agencies or programs operations, right? So having an understanding of the reason behind the policy and the foundation is really crucial. And that foundation might be illuminated by a code, but it also might be illuminated by an issue that a group has come together and said needs to be addressed, right? And so having that understanding of the reason behind the policy is going to be crucial to really making sure that people see it in alignment, right? This prevents the policies from just being these standard things that you see in every workplace, right? If they are informed and connected to the reason and that foundation, they're going to they're going to be able to allow folks to fully comprehend why these policies are in place. And that's why it'll be really important to make sure that policies that are developed are aligned with applicable mandates in a tribal code, that they are aligned with your community values and norms. And again, this is where maybe a mission or vision statement might be useful. Existing resources that are within the community. So you don't want to put policies in place that aren't going to be able to be effectuated, right? And then another source to think about is the funding source requirements. Sometimes funding sources will come with special conditions or mandates for specific policies to be in place and followed through on. So we're going to talk a little bit about an example of that in today's webinar. And then just a larger note around policies too, like we said in our discussions around tribal code development, you want to give yourself some space to reconsider policies once you see them in action and say you aren't really getting the results that you were hoping for, or maybe you created a policy that's too complicated, too bureaucratic. It puts up more barriers than it provides solutions. Give yourself space to go back and be able to say, hey, you know what, this isn't exactly what we were hoping for. Let's go back and talk to each other and see how we can better refine the policy to get at the aim that the group had. And it also, separately, it might be an instinct of a group of people to kind of go to the policies first, like, okay, hey, we got this mandate from tribal code. We need to develop policies in this particular area. Let's get on and jump right into drafting the policy language, and which totally makes sense, right? But it might benefit from some initial steps that might be beneficial in that case, might include visioning and might include digesting the tribal code and say, hey, here's the language in the tribal code. Here's, the findings and purpose section within that, where the provision that you're looking at. And it might be good to have some reflection time with your group, with your employees, with your folks that are tasked with fulfilling the mandate, and talking about how they interpret the code, right? And what is a potential vision for getting that code implemented and really making a difference in your community, right? So doing those kind of discussions might be really helpful before diving right in and trying to think about drafting policy language. Chia, is there anything else you'd like to add on policy development or policies and how they work?
No, I don't. I think that's it. Thanks, Heather.
Okay, thanks, Chia. And so some types of policies, again, board-related policies, it could be around your processes for elections or voting or a code of ethics you have to follow. There might be specific financial policies in place, things regarding travel, contracting, procurement, those types of policies, personnel policies, confidentiality. There might even be some safety policies. There's a wide variety of policies out there that can be developed. So these are just some examples to get you all thinking about what types of policies are out there, and also what types of policies might be currently in place that are coming across and are applicable to your current role, and get you thinking a little bit about what those are, and if you have that understanding about why they're in place, right? Because I think that piece is really important. And often training can be a resource, right? After a policy is developed, especially a new policy, some training or at least some discussion on that, that new policy is going to be super important for folks internalizing and really comprehending the purpose behind the policy and be able to better effectuate any procedures or protocols that are developed. And let's go ahead to the next slide and talk specifically about a particular example we wanted to provide you all. So this example is looking at confidentiality policies. And these are the trigger for that, or the key point for that is grant funding for victim services. So here on this slide, you'll find some information about different code citations and things for your use. But the confidentiality provisions in the Violence Against Women Act and FIPSA apply to grantees and subgrantees who receive funding allocations that are coming from those statutes, right? So grantees and subgrantees funded by these two acts will have some confidentiality policies that need to be in place for them to receive their funding. We also, most local domestic violence programs receive VAWA and FIPSA funding through OVW and the Department of Health and Human Services. So Congress has legally codified the importance of victim confidentiality, and you see your citations there. And you also have supporting DOJ regulations for VAWA grantees and another piece of legislation, VOCA grantees. So it's really important to think about what funding sources are out there and which ones are funding your programs, and if there are any particular specific policies that are going to be required for you all to receive your funds and to accept your awards and then effectuate your programming, right? And here we've got Congress saying that it's of vital importance for victim safety that their confidentiality be preserved. And so that's the why behind these policies being in place, right? So that's the important piece of understanding that you'll need to communicate to your folks working for, in this case, victim service programs that are funded by these funding sources. Again, these protections spark the need for other forms and procedures. So you'll probably think about things like releases of information, what are our record-keeping procedures or mechanisms. Those types of questions are triggered from the requirement that confidentiality policies be in place to receive these grant-specific funds. So again, this is just one example. We provided you a resource that's available for you to access regarding more information on this topic. And again, this is just one example where there's funding requirements. Again, go back and we encourage you all to think about the various funding sources that are funding programs in your community and what those specific requirements might be. Right. And I think from here, and I think we're doing pretty good on time, I'm going to pass it over to Chia to talk a little bit more about protocols and procedures.
Thanks, Heather. Sorry, everyone. I'm keeping my camera off. My internet's been a little wonky here. So just to make sure that that I can stay on, I'm just keeping the camera off. So we're looking at protocols and procedures. So a tribe is only as powerful as the sovereign powers it asserts and exercises. Tribal sovereignty includes the power to enact tribal codes and assert judicial authority over most matters arising in Indian country. So if it's possible, it's helpful to have protocols and policies that are either tied to a mandate established by tribal code and that would have the full and force effect of tribal law, or have the tribal government mandate that apply to agencies and that they're going to adhere to the written policies and protocols that you've developed. So protocols are formal steps taken to help implement tribal code and program or agency policies, and they provide consistent responses. They also provide guidance on how, when, and or who will act, and they may have legal implications. Protocols are guidelines to achieve established policies, and written protocols tend to provide more uniformity and stability in application. So if it's helpful to get those protocols written down. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at a model that's been successfully utilized in other communities, and it's the 8-step model for developing protocol known as the Protocol Development Cycle, taken from Improving Community Response to Crime Victim Services. And this is, it was developed by Anita Bowles, John Patterson, and this is from their Sage publications from December 1996. So I just do want to note that this is for crime victim services. And this could be adapted to use for other issue areas that you might be looking at. As Heather mentioned earlier in the webinar, there's other issue areas that you could use this for. So the development of protocol is a cyclical process, as you see here, with the results of each completed cycle used during the next cycle as basis for adjusting your protocols. The protocol development cycle is designed to create community-specific protocol to improve the response to domestic violence victims, including children. So this model utilizes a cyclical approach where once the 8 steps are completed, then you're going to repeat it again. So this circular process promotes a current best practice for the protocols as new information and data becomes evident. And this is a great model to provide guidance for tribal communities because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it can be easily adjusted for different tribal communities. In addition, this approach can address the reality of tribal diversity and tribal customs and practices. So first, we're going to look at the inventory of existing services. The purpose of taking inventory of the existing services is to examine areas in the community that are currently addressing whatever issue you're looking at. As I previously mentioned, this focus on domestic violence victims here. The inventory should be as comprehensive as possible. And next, we're going to go to the victim experience survey. So the goal would be to conduct a confidential survey to, and here I'm looking at victims' rights. So I'm just going to go through as if that's what we're looking at. Again, you can change it and tailor it for whatever program you're looking at. So here a survey would be conducted to determine the victim's views of how well the system is responding to their needs. And the survey should seek to see how victims feel regarding how their cases were handled, how they were treated by each discipline. And the goal of the survey is to get information on how each agency responds to domestic violence victims and the effectiveness of those services. And this goal should be stated very clearly in the request for the victims to complete the survey and to assure them that there's confidentiality, and potentially it would be an anonymous survey. And I know sometimes this is difficult to do in tribal communities, but as it's small, but we just try to do our best with that, depending on what services you're looking at. So next, for the third one, we're going to move to the community needs assessment. And this step's focused on gathering information from your community. And here again, I'm going for the example of domestic violence victims. So many communities collect this information through public hearings and forums, and you might need to develop creative ways to get input from everyone. So it's often helpful to offer food or transportation and childcare to allow people to participate. And the public hearings should be held in locations that are easily accessible to everyone in the community. And planning the hearings, you would want to consider to try to have a non-threatening atmosphere. Maybe distribute a public announcement for the radio and to tell them about the hearings and forums. And you want to make sure you get a variety of groups. So you would want to include the local media, like a reservation radio station, tribal newspaper, posted at community centers, churches, restaurants, laundromats, grocery, any different stores. So be sure that to provide the general public with logistical information, such as the time and place, and explain that you'll be asking them for input. And those who wish to contribute information and testimony should be at the hearing. And one of the important tasks that must be accomplished is the development of broad-based support from all segments of the tribal community. And that helps create buy-in for whatever you're trying to set up, whether it's domestic violence or some type of court or whatever the issue might be. It's always helpful to have support from your entire community. So next, we're going to number 4, protocol writing. After you develop your community needs assessment, you'll be ready to begin designing your protocols. And you want to pay particular attention to communication and collaboration across agency lines to ensure the best response. Protocols should address the problems identified by the community and service providers. And in this case, it would be domestic violence victims. So next, we're going to renewing interagency agreements, or if you're just starting out on a new program, signing those interagency agreements. So once your protocol is finalized, each agency should also sign formal agreements to implement that protocol. And these signed agreements commit resources to ensure that all the staff are fully trained in their responsibilities. And next, number 6, ongoing trainings. In most communities, all the agencies who sign the cross-discipline protocol agreement will participate in multidisciplinary mandatory training to ensure that everyone understands and that we can implement the agreed upon protocols. So ongoing training should be a required commitment by all staff, and it might be included. It would be ideal to have that included in the agreement signed by each department head. And the training program may call for a commitment of time and energy by all the partners. And so each partner agency should ensure that all the personnel who are providing services are involved in the training and attend. So once your trainings have been identified and scheduled, then you want to inform all the disciplines of the training dates, times, and location. And you might need to arrange for refreshments and get evaluation forms, handouts, video, and have any equipment that you need on hand for training. So then we're going to go to monitoring progress. So you want to develop a way to monitor the progress, and monitoring is also designed to answer the following questions. Are the protocols being properly implemented? Are your protocols achieving the desired results? And you may use meetings to discuss the successes and challenges that have arisen since the protocols have been written and utilized. And you'll likely have to refer to these findings in the next cycle of your protocol development process. And then number 8 is the evaluation. And this is usually more formal than just monitoring. You should plan on designing an evaluation process to measure at least 3 things. So 1, the extent to which system problems have been improved or eliminated. 2, the extent to which, so in this case, again, victims, to the extent to which victims feel supported through the process. And 3, the extent to which agencies have improved their response. And here it would be incidents of domestic violence. The evaluation could include results of ongoing victim experience surveys, and think about how your community defines success. For example, instead of measuring just numbers and outcomes, you might want to do interviews with, in this case, victims or agencies, and you might get more meaningful information on what success looks like in your community. And so you might want to hire an individual who has expertise in developing evaluation tools and conducting evaluations in tribal communities if possible. And then, as you see here, you want to start all over again, just to keep refining and hopefully improving your processes. Okay, next slide, please.
Chia, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of like think through an example, right? So looking at Chia's example of crime victim services and responses for DV victims, and let's say the tribal community has just codified some victims' rights in their civil and or criminal legal processes. Looking at this example and reflecting on the different steps that Chia just outlined for us, I want to ask our audience, what types of agencies do you think that might need to be involved in the example protocol development process that we just reviewed? So say you're the victim service agency, right, that wants to engage in operationalizing these new codified victim rights in your community. What types of agencies might be involved if we take that example? Just so we can think it through. Chia did a wonderful job explaining each of the steps. Feel free to add your responses in the chat. I'm gonna go ahead and type that. Okay, great. Tribal police. Yep. Tribal court, advocates, victim services. Oh, yes, mental health, social services. Yep. Great. Thank y'all for thinking through that. Because I just wanted to put that question out there because, that's just in these quick responses we've named, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 potential agencies just in this quick exercise, right? And so to get all of those different parties, those different agencies on the same wavelength, that's where outlining the protocol and making sure that it's written and everybody's understanding who's acting when is going to be super important, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to make sure that in our example here, that victims are aware of those rights and that each agency is making sure they are doing their part in ensuring the victim has everything they need to exercise those rights. Thanks everyone for indulging me there, and Chia, thank you.
Thanks, Heather. So here we have another chat question just to get you all thinking and see, with this basic understanding of what policies and protocols are, why do you think each policies and protocols and procedures are important? It's like a tongue twister for me. Sorry, everyone. It's a lot of P's here. Any thoughts? Just something to think about when you're drafting your policies and protocols, and you want to include mitigating risks of liability and also educating your employees and the parties that are following the policies and procedures. So it's helpful to use, there's some draft templates out there, but vital to customize to your specific program needs. So it's always good to look and see what's out there, but definitely make sure it's going to follow what's going on with your particular program. So I see someone says, provide structure to the conversations among all parties, and all are really important to effectively help victims. And consistency and efficiency are important. Policy and procedure allows for an agreement within a group of departments, and it brings balance. Great, thanks everyone. All right, so we have another a poll question. Does your organization have a mission and vision statement? Are we able to launch that poll? All right, I saw a couple answers. For some reason, I can't see the outcome, but someone did say yes. All right, thanks. We could go to the next slide. So looking at, okay, great, here's the results. Oh, okay, the results were there. Okay, there we go. Looks like 80% have a mission and vision statement and 20% are unsure. Well, it's something to go back and take a look when you get a chance, and it's helpful to see what your organization does have for its mission and vision. So a mission, we're going to look at who are you as an organization? What do you do? What do you value? Who do you serve? Why do you serve them, and how you serve them? So you can really get in here and explain what you're doing and the importance of the work that you do. And a vision statement, it's aspirational and it provides a description of what the planning team would aspire to achieve to address whatever topic or issue that you're working on in the tribal community. So for example, say if we're looking at domestic violence, since that's what we were kind of looking at before, your focus would be including victim and child safety, cultural beliefs and practices, family service needs, and batterer accountability. And a planning team for, if we're looking at domestic violence, the planning team should review tribal traditions, stories, and customs regarding women, children, healing, and justice. And this research could be done by interviewing elders within your tribal community. So I guess just, think about that for whatever issue area that you're looking at. And if it's not domestic violence, but it's still something, in your tribal community, it's still helpful to look at your tribal customs, your stories, and interviewing elders to see how that specific topic that you're working on is, what its place is within your tribal community. Heather, do you want to add anything?
I think the only thing I would add is that, thinking back on the discussion that we just had on that protocol development model and how many different agencies might have needed to come together to develop, to effectuate the protocol in that example. It's really great if each organization kind of asks themselves about their mission and vision, right? Because then when you're coming together as a team and say you're trying to really mobilize your entire community to respond to an issue, or there's a mandate for multiple entities to respond to an issue, if everybody's coming to the table with their separate missions and visions, that's super helpful because you can that kind of lets everybody know each party's orientation and their and again, like those core values, who they're trying to serve, why they're serving them. And then that also, each organization and each party could come to their table with their separate mission and vision. But then when that group comes together, that group can also do some of that visioning and talking through what they're trying to address in the long term. And that can really help unify everyone and really create some investment into effectuating a policy or meeting that mandate that's put in tribal code, and really bring that spirit of collaboration and camaraderie to all work together to solve a community issue. So that's kind of, I think of mission and vision as not only the organization that's taking on this charge or taking on the development of a protocol, but also just like different agencies coming together and that may have to come together via a mandate, and how sometimes siloing can happen. And so if folks are coming together, having these kind of foundational conversations about what each department does and why they do it and who they serve could be really helpful.
Thanks, Heather. Next slide. So here's a discussion question. How might brainstorming a mission and vision for your organization help you craft policies and protocols? Well, what do you think, Heather? If that folks are taking some time to think, or it's a little late on a Friday afternoon, I completely get it.
I know we're asking a lot on Friday. But no, and I'm like, I don't know if I kind of gave the answer when I added my comments to the previous slide. But you know, it again, I think it goes back to like with policies, especially since they're more internal and you've got certain folks that are trying to that the policy applies to. And then if it gets broadened by a protocol where you're working with multiple parties, it's really important, I feel like, to stay, to allow the group to stay grounded. And then really think about like, okay, why is this policy in place? Like, why are we developing these protocols? Why do we need these action steps, right? And so I think having that larger or bigger discussion and brainstorming around a mission and vision could really help get to the understanding why specific policies or action steps need to be developed. And then it's also further expanding, you know, say, hey, you say, for example, there's a tribal code that came through, folks didn't really know what happened. It just, you know, it's all of a sudden a mandate, right? And it's become tribal law. And then folks are tasked with, you know, taking on the, okay, how are we going to actually put this code or the mandate in this code into action? You know, it allows for folks to really come together and think about what they have and how they're able to effectuate that mandate, and taking it out of that, like, okay, this was a mandate handed down to us in this particular case, but hey, we have this larger vision for what we want for community safety or for family preservation. And it really allows folks to have those larger substantive conversations. So I think that's what I would say.
Thanks, Heather. We got a couple answers as well. So someone said perhaps it can help to focus in a particular direction. It may help the prosecution and investigation. And it could enable you to recognize and respect your cultural traditions when crafting policies and procedures, or protocols, excuse me, and allows for varying viewpoints and a broader vision. And it clarifies your organization's purpose. Right, thanks everyone. And next slide, I believe this is Heather. Next
Thanks,
slide,
Chia.
please.
And thank you all so much for indulging us with all of our chats and poll questions, especially on a Friday, like Chia mentioned. We just thought that, you know, sometimes, again, like kind of going back to my previous comment about how sometimes policies and procedures can just feel really like standard and things that are out there, but they don't really have any meaning. And, you know, I hope through our discussions today and through the presentation today, you all were able to take away that they can be much more than that. And, you know, really, you know, as Chia mentioned earlier, it's great that, you know, tribes can exercise sovereignty by passing laws and codes and regulations and ordinances. But if those are not actually effectuated in the community, then, you know, what is the point of passing those laws, right? And so policies and procedures can really help get at the behavior that was being prohibited, or the tribal value that's being expressed in a particular statute or provision, like actually getting those impacts out into the community, right? And getting that that response from your community, your various community members, but also your leadership and your various tribal programs and agencies. And so we just wanted to end by offering this visual of the drum, and really thinking about how working together, each of these pieces, codes, policies, and procedures or protocols can really work together to create a systemic response, like a system response. You're building that community of care. You're having various parties, agencies working together to really get at an issue that has been identified as important in your tribal community. And, you know, when I was looking at this image here, I kind of thought about just like, when you think about when we gather as community members, like say a powwow or an intertribal gathering for the purpose to gather in prayer, but also like engage in meaningful social interaction. I feel like you can kind of see some parallels to how codes, policies, and procedures really can work together to provide that systemic response. You know, there are established and enforceable rules that are then followed by a set of processes. So, you know, taking powwow, I think about, you know, grand entries or maybe certain songs that start and end a session during a particular ceremony. And then you have those rules and processes are then followed and implemented by a set of protocols of how you should conduct yourself in the arena, how you should conduct yourself during a ceremony or gathering. And those are followed by participants and spectators alike. And certain people have certain roles, right? And certain people take certain steps during those gatherings. So we just wanted to offer this image to you as a kind of a culmination of all of our discussion today, but also weaving in what we talked about in part 1 and part 2 with just the importance of tribal codes, the importance of the opportunity tribal governments have to weave in community specific, tribally specific culture, custom, and tradition, and how that can really work together with policies and procedures to really get at and tackle issues in tribal communities. So again, just wanted to end with that image, and feel free to, if you have any reflections as well, our folks in the audience, please feel free to drop that in the chat. And I think we did really well on time. So if folks have any burning questions from today's discussions or just reflections in general, if you've been with us for the entire series, any takeaways that you would like to offer the group, we've got plenty of time to address those now. And then if folks are good, then we'll just follow through into the resources that we have for our topic for today.
I don't see any questions yet. I see lots of thank yous and we appreciate it. We're happy to be here. We'll keep an eye out for additional questions, but if we could move to the next slide, I'll just try to move through the resources quickly. These are all available on the home tlpi.org site. And so these are some of our publications. We have tribal domestic violence case law and tribal legal code resources. And I would like to note that some of our resources regarding domestic violence have not all of them have been updated with the VAWA 2022. So just keep that in mind. We're working to update those things and to implement the new jurisdiction discussion. So we also have sex trafficking in Indian country, sharing our stories of survival. See, next slide, please. So this is a policies and procedures webinar from Fox Valley and the National Criminal Justice Training Center. And there's no fee for this. And I believe this is online. So there's a 3-part series. And Marlon dropped those links into the chat. Next slide, please. So this is one of our resources that does include that whole circular slide that we went through. This is Tribal Domestic Violence Courts and Dockets. And we also have some information on setting up a DV court or a DV docket. And again, as I mentioned, we have it updated to VAWA 2022, but this is available on the TLPI home site. Next slide. So here's just some information on our VAWA Special Tribal Criminal Jurisdiction resources. We have a new website, tribalvawa.org, And we also have tribalinstitute.org VAWA 2022. And I believe, I apologize, our NCAI Tribal VAWA resources. If you all haven't seen it, NCAI recently updated their website. I believe it was 2 days ago. And so I think the Tribal VAWA website is still accessible, like the sources, like PDFs and documents are available. But if you go to the site that we have listed here, it's not fully there. So I apologize for that. Next slide, please. And this is just mentioning our, as I said before, the Tribal VAWA website. This is fairly new, and we just have a lot of information for the VAWA 2022 covered conduct. We have the information about the different categories, frequently asked questions, updates, webinars, resources, information on the Intertribal Technical Assistance Working Group. So please take a look at that. We hope it's helpful. Next slide, please. And here is our information. Feel free to reach out to any of us. And if you need more information on the Intertribal Working Group, there's the email address to reach out to. And Heather, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Chia. Just a huge thank you again to everyone who's been on our Zoom today, but also might have been with us throughout the entire series. I think we, Kelly and I talked about this in part one, that it's just the time is right for tribes to be developing codes that are community, that are responsive to community needs and culturally informed, especially as, you know, we look at things like VAWA 2022 and special tribal criminal jurisdiction, which brings on more reliance on tribal codes for different covered crimes and conduct. So it's just, you know, there's that space, that opportunity, that time, and those resources that are out there to assist tribal communities to create tribal codes and policies and procedures, and really just larger responses, right? Community responses to issues. And so TLPI is there for each of you. As you're thinking about those topics. Red Wind is there for you as you're thinking about these types of issues. And so between Red Wind and TLPI, we also want to put out there for tribal government program grantees, but also Dawn grantees. There may be opportunities for TLPI and Red Wind to either collaborate or work together or figure out how we can provide services to you, such as code review. So please, again, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us here or to Red Wind. We want to be a resource for you all. So thank you so much. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Monica to wrap things up.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Chia. Before we end this session, I want to let you know that there will be an eval popping up once the Zoom closes. We'd love to hear what you thought. So if you're able to fill that out, we'd very appreciate it. We will be sending out a newsletter when we have our next webinar or set of webinars approved. This was our last webinar for this series. We hope that you enjoyed them. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be uploaded onto Red Wind's YouTube channel within the next few days. You can find previous recordings there. In closing, I'd like to thank Heather and Chia. I'd like to thank our captioner. I'd like to thank you as well, Marlon. And thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I hope you have a great weekend and you stay safe, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.